Hello and welcome to Season 4 of On the Irregular with me, Java Berry. In previous seasons, I've chatted to women from all walks of life about their unique creative journeys, how they got here and how their story has shaped their creative process. For this season, I wanted to specifically explore the way in which grief informs the creative process, how transformative it can be, and how it weaves its way through our lives in many tangled ways, how it manifests in our work, and how we navigate the endless twists and turns. I cannot wait for you to hear these conversations. Each one moved me in a profound way, and often made me laugh and cry simultaneously. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to On the Irregular Season 4 on creativity and grief. In this episode, I talk with my dear friend and neighbour, the author Rozie Kelly. On a sunny autumn morning, Rozie and I headed out for a walk through the fields. We talked about losing her dad in lockdown and how this time of enforced solitude helped her embrace her grief, and also how Buffy the Vampire Slayer featured heavily in this process. We talked about her soon-to-be-published debut novel, Kingfisher. We talked about how the loss of her dad has impacted how she thinks about stories, and she told me the best piece of writing advice she has ever received. Welcome to my conversation with the wonderfully eloquent Rozie Kelly. A gentle warning, this episode contains swearing. There we go. Okay, we're recording. Perfect.
Excellent.
So, thank you for talking to me, Rozie.
You're very welcome.
We're out on a sunny day, walking up through the fields to Old Town. It's blisteringly bright and really muddy and soggy. So, would you like to start off with telling me a bit about your background, where you're from, a bit about your work, and then we'll follow on from there?
Of course. So I'm from the Midlands originally. I'm kind of a fairly recent Yorkshire convert. So I grew up kind of around Stratford-upon-Avon and Leamington Spa. Moved up this end of the country initially to study in Manchester, and then found Hebden Bridge and all its kind of weirdness and silliness. And also, we're currently looking at the perfect autumn day, really.
I know, look, there's Hepton Stall Church.
Yeah.
Loads of sheep.
The colours.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of fell for this and moved here in that weird bit of, it was the second lockdown, whenever the one in November happened, where one of the few things you could do was go and look at houses. So it was like that was like a day out, and ended up moving here. And I am a writer, and I also work for the Arvon Foundation, which is a creative writing charity that run residential writing courses. So we have a house here in West Yorkshire, which used to be Ted Hughes's home, a house in Shropshire, and a house in Devon.
Okay, we can navigate this style.
Yes,
can do it.
Okay.
We're attached
Navigating
to each
the
other.
style and a load of poo, and trying to remember what it is that I do. And
let's go down that way.
I think the reason that I was so interested to have this conversation with you is because Java has read my novel manuscript.
It's beautiful.
And I'd written this novel in the aftermath of losing my father, and also kind of in this period where lots of people suddenly were losing lots of people. And I was talking to Java about it afterwards, and she described it as a book about grief. And I went, what? Because of a spectacular lack of self-awareness, I had not understood.
Are you kidding me?
That's what I had written. Yeah. Yes.
Wow.
It could not be more obviously about grief. It's literally the story of someone dying.
What did you think it was about?
I think so. Before I wrote that book, I was doing my masters, and I'd been writing a totally different book about a young woman who had this incredibly difficult life. She'd been abused when she was younger. These are all themes that kind of come up in my work all the time. But she spent her time like bending herself into different shapes for the world. She never walked into a room feeling like she belonged there, and I was exhausted of trying to write somebody like that. Someone who I identified with. I felt that way a lot of the time, but I was like, I want to write something about someone who thinks they own it all, who walks into a space and it just like would never have occurred to them that they didn't belong there. So naturally, my first person protagonist, is a white man. But I think as lots of us kind of are, I was sick of the straight white man narrative. And I'm always interested in queer stories and the ways in which, because I think queer people often have to kind of create their own structures, their own families, their own kind of ways of looking at the world and understanding the world. I was far more interested in a queer gaze, so I ended up writing this story from the perspective of a gay white man, quite a privileged man, comfortably wealthy, very beautiful, sort of like quite femininely beautiful, but what we would definitely understand as kind of conventionally attractive. And that was all it was born out of. I kind of just wanted to feel what that felt like, sort of vicariously through him. And I wanted to examine what a kind of a queered version of a heterosexual relationship would look like. He has an infatuation with an older woman, and although he is a man and she is a woman, it was coming from a very different viewpoint, a different gaze. So that was really all that kind of that story sprang from. But then the world got involved, and the first lockdown hit, and my dad, who I had quite a complicated relationship with, a kind of older father, very stubborn, very, born in like 42, so very of that generation. And he lost his dad when he was 6, and everyone's the man of the house now, so it's really kind of complicated masculine energy. Who obviously I loved dearly, but he was hard work. He'd never treated his body particularly well, and he was quite elderly, and therefore obviously very vulnerable when COVID hit, and he passed away it was the end of April, so kind of right in the middle of that first lockdown. When the weather was gorgeous, and everyone was just in their gardens having a lovely time. And it was the first, and I guess the most common kind of big death. Like, I think the parents is the one we're all probably going to get, right? The vast majority of us. And that's complicated by all sorts of things depending on your relationship with that person. But it was the first one I've had. Like, I'd lost grandparents before as a child, but you don't fully, I think, understand it. And then this was a death that rocked everything. And I was about halfway through my masters at this point, and we'd kind of obviously had to switch to online teaching, and very, very strange time. But I'm kind of very intrigued to hear the stories of anyone who lost someone during COVID or from COVID.
Yeah.
Because the world stopped, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's that poem, isn't there, that I can't remember who it's by.
Four Weddings and a Funeral,
Yes.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that one.
John Hannah recites it, yes.
Exactly. Because I think when you lose someone, you want the world to stop. You want everyone to be like as totally broken by it as you are.
Yeah, yeah. It's baffling when it doesn't. It's
There's just people in like cafes and shops and like everyone acting like it's normal, and you're screaming and like, this isn't normal. The whole kind of structure with which I understood the world has fallen away.
Yeah.
How can you be pretending that hasn't happened? And I think that the thing that was so interesting about losing someone in that time was that the world did stop. And everyone was going, what the fuck is going on? You know, what's happening?
Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. Gosh, so in a way, like, there's all this space.
Yes, exactly. Exactly that. There's all this space. And I think because of what I was doing, you know, I was studying and kind of working part-time in a cafe. So the studying went online, the cafe didn't exist for a bit, and, you know, we all got furloughed, which is that word that we don't hear now, but was like so present in everyone's lives at the time. So I did have all of this space, and I think, I mean, the world stopping doesn't help. Like we kind of have that urge, but actually, you know, all it means really is that like the external world is kind of matching up to how you're feeling. It's not comforting. It's just like, oh yeah, that's about right. Yeah, it's all over. It's all ending.
Yeah. Hadn't thought about that. Jesus.
But I also feel incredibly lucky because it did give me that space to, I think, embrace grief. Almost like in quite a mad way. I think really like in quite a it wasn't like a really like thought out kind of hippie type of way of being like, I'm going to embrace this thing. It was like, I'm going to slam my face into the bit that really hurts and like really go in and feel everything.
Yep.
My poor partner, we were working out of this tiny little house, and he was trying to work from home and take work calls, and I would just be like literally wailing upstairs. I think that was kind of the beginning of a period of time where everything became fragile, and the time, I'm slightly unclear on the timeline, but within that time, a dear friend of mine from when I was a teenager also died completely out of the blue. No full explanation. He was 32, 33, I would think, something like that.
Shit.
And then also my dad's older sister, I think it was probably about a year after he passed away.
Wow, that's a lot in a short space of time.
Yeah, and it's not just that, right? Like everyone was grieving everything. Yeah. The way the world worked. Yeah. Being able to go to the pub. Yeah. You know, and not to mention all of the people that did actually die from COVID. I should say actually my dad, so he had COPD, which is like a lung condition. I don't fully understand. It's like a degenerative lung condition.
Right.
And I think he's had it for a long time, and I don't think he really understood that it was something that would kind of kill him. Right. And he was still, you know, like chaining super kings and doing all the things that you absolutely shouldn't do. And I think in the end he picked up pneumonia. Okay. But because obviously the hospital didn't know that until the test came back, he was kind of, we were all behaving as if it was COVID that he had. Right. So I was very, very lucky to be able to go and see him in hospital and be with him when he died. And I remember really clearly driving. So we were living on the edge of the Peak District at the time, and driving down to Cheltenham on these like weird empty roads.
Yeah.
Listening to By the Way by the Red Hot Chili Peppers for some reason, and getting to the hospital and it being like a little bit like 28 days later. Like we had to kind of find where we were going, and there was just like no one around. And I think at that point we were still in that bit where people were being like, it's a cold, it's just a cold. Like, we're all fine, stop being so dramatic. And obviously healthcare professionals were like, no, that's not what's happening. So kind of witnessing that and then getting there and putting on the plastic business and the gloves and the mask and everything else. Yeah, it was a very, very strange time.
Because you've described in the piece that you sent me about Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which we will come to.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a brilliant essay, and there's a moment that you describe when you know that he's dying, and it suddenly becomes imperative that you open the window to let him out, and that's such a strong image. I had to stop reading for a bit and kind of take that in. Just that feeling, that instinct, those things that kind of override any rationale or whatever, it is rational, I don't know, but it's like, this is what needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And I guess being in a clinical environment as well, maybe feeling to let the outside in, I don't know.
Yeah, it was very odd, and like weirdly, because I was sat holding his hand on one side and my brother was sat on the other side, and for some reason I was sat, just by accident, with a mirror on the other side.
Yes.
So every time I kind of glanced up at my brother, I could see myself grieving in this like sort of sort of like, well, in the process of beginning to understand that was what was happening. It's a very strange environment. But I did feel like I had to let him out. And the kind of, I guess the aftermath of that is the kind of normal thing. Like, I explained it all to the university, I got extension for my dissertation, I had a really wonderful supervisor who was just very like, look, this is what the rules are, and then we can just do whatever it is that you kind of need to do to get this done. I wasn't writing Kingfisher then. I wasn't writing this book about grief that I had wrote the whole thing and had to be told by you. That's what it was. I was still writing this book about this girl who was just sort of fighting against everything and bending herself into every shape. And I managed to write my dissertation. I think in that piece was the first time that she kind of had any agency.
Right.
So I was clearly already trying to, I guess, find a framework that worked for me. And I've been thinking a lot about the way in which our grief is a creative process itself, because I think that when you lose someone, a big someone, all of the kind of framework around your own life that you've built up as an adult of like, this is how I feel about this is how I do this is like the way in which I process X, Y, Z, or how I manage my energy or whatever else, suddenly those frameworks don't function anymore, because a big part of why they work, that it's like a big sort of magnetic force of that, is the people that are in your life. So if you lose a really big one of those, suddenly the things that used to make you feel good maybe don't make you feel good anymore, or the things that used to help you get out of bed, suddenly nothing quite works, doesn't quite fit, there's like a bit missing, or like and I think that because I had this opportunity due to lockdown, to really just embrace all of the feelings that were coming with it and just stop and just have this kind of this I was forced to slow down, to wait, to kind of rot a bit, to kind of, it's very hard not to use all the autumn metaphors that are like glaring us in the face right now on this like beautiful day, but it is, you know, nature's very good at grieving.
Yeah, does it every year.
Yeah, and it's not sad really, I don't think. But yeah, that kind of rot really, like be a bit of a squidgy bit of a leaf on the floor in the mud and just kind of sit in it. I think that both allowed me and forced me to build new frameworks in the place of the ones that no longer worked when my dad wasn't around.
Yeah, I can see that. So in itself it's creative because you have, like you said, you're having to restructure and
I think
find
so,
ways.
yeah.
I can see that.
And I think it's kind of inevitable, isn't it, as like as someone who makes art of like any kind, that will just kind of seep into whatever it is you're working on. I think like there's an interesting thing that pops up a lot for female writers, perhaps hopefully less than it once did, but if if a man writes a novel, it's a great commentary on the state of being a human, a universal state of humanity, and if a woman does, it's her life.
Yeah, it's just biographical, and it must have been cathartic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So it sometimes with that hovering over you can feel quite, you almost don't want to say that any of it's come from your life,
yeah, I get
because that can
yeah.
very easily get sucked into like that perception, and I don't think that's true. I think like as creatives we're all kind of trying to search for some kind of emotional truth. Whether that's like a question or an answer, like I really don't know, but you can only be influenced by your own emotions if that's what you're looking for, I guess. So this is probably where I need to talk about Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Please do.
Because in a stroke of like pure luck, at this particular time, all of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from beginning to end was put onto 4OD, and I was in my rotty little bed in my stinky pyjamas crying, and I thought, perfect, this is what I need, you know.
Had you watched it all the first time round?
Oh yes, yes, absolutely. And it was very so what am I now? Nearly 35, so I'm like right in the kind of right age.
Yeah.
I think I would have been, I'm not actually sure when it came out, probably like 10 when it came out, something like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to, I was probably, it must have been 14, 15, yes, yeah.
So yeah, like exactly the time where I was trying to figure out what kind of teenager I would be, and that, you know, and who I fancied and all of those things. So yeah, it was kind of the perfect thing really, because comforting, nostalgia, but something really interesting started to happen as I watched it, because, you know, as anyone that will have watched any of those kinds of TV shows, particularly the sort of adventure-y series in America where there's like 1 million episodes a series, like they're quite formulaic. They have, you know, each episode has this like bad guy of some kind, and usually you get a nice satisfying vanquish of the little one within the context of that episode. And then there's also a larger arc that's beginning to appear across the series, the big bad.
Yes.
And the Scooby Gang's getting together, they're in the library, they're figuring it all out, and then you have this extra layer of satisfaction at the end of each series. And I began to realise that the pattern of this story was doing something really good to my brain, where I was, in my reality was, there was no neat bow at the end, there was no kind of like satisfaction to any of it. You know, we were very much in the stage where none of us really understood what COVID was going to do, what our lives were going to look like, you know, all the rest of it. So I didn't have any of this kind of, there were no endings really. But Buffy was providing this for me. And I think it gave me a bit of an understanding of what stories do for us as human beings. And I think this works, whether or not you're a writer or that's how you tell stories, or if you can tell stories at all. Yeah. Because I think we're always kind of fabricating some kind of narrative to ourselves, the way in which we look at our lives or perceive what's happened to us or all the rest of it.
Even just sharing stuff on social media, you're telling a story.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all a kind of search for understanding. Yeah. On a basic level, words are just categories, right? They're just ways for us to put things into an order that we can make sense of. Oh, goodness me, there's too many hills around here. So I began to kind of realise that this beginning and end, this kind of arc was like this really comforting, reassuring thing that was kind of happening. And I guess without even really meaning to, I began to kind of implement that kind of into my understanding of what had happened to me and into my own writing.
Do you want to take a moment?
Let's take a minute. Oh, it's beautiful.
It's so beautiful. I am sweating. Oh my god.
Too many thermals.
Too many thermals and woolens. Oh my god.
Yeah, let's do it.
And then we'll get freezing cold because we're all sweaty. So where were we at? We're talking about Buffy and about...
Yeah, I was kind of slightly disjointedly trying to kind of explain what it was that spoke to me so much about it.
Yeah, and then how you then kind of implemented it into your writing and how you approached, I think, processing everything.
Yeah, I think it's all sort of to do with building a narrative, I guess, isn't it? And I think the other thing that we do that with is memory. Mm-hmm. In that way, there's also, there's those kind of memories you have from when you're younger, where you're like, is this a memory or is this a photograph?
Yeah.
And isn't it like every time you're remembering something, you're remembering the memory rather than the actual occasion or something?
So it's just strengthening the memory.
So you're literally, all our brains are doing is kind of fabricating all the time.
Oh, that's interesting.
And obviously with something like grief, memory is, that is what it is, right? Like grief is love and you've got nowhere to put it.
Yeah.
And the only way that you have to think about what you've lost is within memory. So I think I've got a new understanding and respect for storytelling that has come from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the absolute queen.
I think I was so resistant to Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a teenager because I think all I saw was a skinny blonde girl.
Yeah.
And I just was so threatened and I couldn't see beyond that. Yeah. And then I rewatched it in my 20s and I was like, this is fucking amazing.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. It's such amazing storytelling. And like you said in the piece that you said, was that it's aged well, but not like a fine wine, like a vintage handbag. A bit musty, but it's so stylish.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it kind of dealt with some like pretty complicated stuff. It had the first like lesbian romance in the US, or that was kind of on prime time TV.
Yeah, that was huge.
It had some like fucking mad stuff about consent with Spike, which it really whether they answered that question is another one. But it wasn't it was fluffy and trashy, but also didn't hide from stuff.
Yeah.
And there's one episode in particular. I was about to say spoilers, but like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
There's one episode which I think is in series 5 when Buffy's mum dies, and I was so affected by it because it's like absolute like genius decision. There's no music. there's no soundtrack to the whole episode. And like, if you've watched Buffy, you know, like, you know, there were bands that we recognised that were kind of like pop punk kind of, you know, men in sort of glittery crop tops and sort of women wandering around with their eyes closed on stage, and it's like very iconic. And even the soundtrack itself is like, we all know that sound, that kind of
just the sound
riff,
of it,
but like takes you back to that. So I think it was such a clever choice for that episode to have no music, because it was like really, you were feeling it. You were just feeling the feelings of like what is happening? Like, how can this happen? Like, particularly with a parent, that feeling of like, you know, they're invincible for a bit when we're little, and then they're sort of embarrassing, but then they're kind of invincible again, maybe, or just like, I'm like very impressed. Impressed. Like.
Yeah, it's kind of it steps away from her superhero. In a way, isn't it? It's like,
she becomes useless. Yeah, she becomes useless because it's too late. She's dead, and there's nothing she can do about that. So I was in my room in my pajamas, kind of experiencing this rise and fall of every single episode. You know, hours of the stuff.
How did you feel when it ended?
Not as much of a loss as you might think. I guess I was kind of pathetically grateful, to be honest, that I'd had this like companion. I genuinely don't know what I would have done without it in that space, because I couldn't go anywhere, I couldn't do anything. I had to kind of be in the feelings and feel the feelings, and then so I was, you know, watching. That's what you do, right? You just watch stuff, and I also kind of had to have my headphones in because my partner's downstairs trying to like be in a meeting. So I really like went into that world, and I had all these friends. God, this is embarrassing, isn't it?
No, I totally get that. They do become your friends, and you look forward to seeing them. Like, what are they going to say next? Oh, you.
So I think I was sad, but I was just really grateful, because it was almost like it had put my brain on a treadmill to just do the basic movement that it needed to keep going, that I didn't have the wherewithal to make it do myself. So it was just constantly kind of like ticking over, exercising these muscles that like I really needed. And then I got to the end, and I kind of got to a point where I sort of felt like I could use them. So I did manage to finish my dissertation.
Well done.
Which I still sort of like, I'm surprised by.
I know, that's incredible to be able to have done that at that time.
I have like complicated feelings about it, because, you know, what I wasn't doing was losing someone in this kind of spectacular ways that everyone was losing someone and grieving in that particular year, in like all sorts of different ways, you know, not just through COVID. You know, I was losing an elderly dad who wasn't very well, which is like quite a normal part of everybody's life, really.
But it doesn't diminish.
But
you know, it's love. It's still love.
And I do think that experience has kind of made an imprint on how I think about stories. And so I'd kind of finished my dissertation, and then I think quite quickly, it's all a bit blurry now, I can't quite remember at what point I started writing Kingfisher, but it was fairly quickly after that it just kind of poured out of me.
Really? Was it just a pouring out experience?
Yeah, some of the first draft I think I wrote in about 8 months, which isn't like, you know, it's superhuman, but it's pretty quick for a full novel draft, I think.
And
hilariously, I didn't think it was about death.
Gosh. I mean, because there are so many other elements in it, like you say, like power and love and attraction and infatuation and sex.
There's kind of a very particular kind of like quite a strange kind of lust in it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, their relationship. So I can completely see how, you know, I wouldn't want to sum it up as just like, yeah, it's a book about grief, but it's definitely present. I would say it's present in there.
The best piece of writing advice that I've ever heard and kind of used and implemented, which I've probably mentioned to you before, which I have, I think, like third hand from a friend of mine who's a writer who got it from his friend who's a writer who got it from someone I think who taught them, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure where the root of it is, but don't flinch.
Yes, I remember you telling me that's such a good piece. Yeah,
and I'm obsessed with it because I guess, yeah, if the assumption is that the search is for some kind of emotional truth, then that is going to come from like pressing on the bit that hurts.
Yeah.
And it's complicated because I think there is so much healing that can come from creativity, but there's also, I think you can also hurt yourself by attempting to do just that, maybe, or like attempting to write those love letters to someone, you know, to a grief that is so fundamental and deep and kind of totally and utterly unhealable that actually, you know, you could hurt yourself by kind of attempting to interact with it that way, or maybe too soon, or
yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I feel like times when I've channeled grief into writing, and it's generally always writing, I think that's how I process grief, it's been because I've absolutely had to get it out and on the page, and it's always felt painful. I don't know if it's been healing, but it's definitely been useful. Yeah, it's always felt useful to just kind of put the words to it and identify the feelings, or even just to be able to describe a situation and kind of, I don't know, for some reason there's just something about putting something into words that kind of clarifies it. But yeah, I can imagine like possibly forcing or trying to push something out or through could be quite damaging. Because you're not always right to, you know, that's the thing, it's like sometimes being numb is the right thing. Sometimes not feeling is like you just
sometimes
got to...
sitting in your pyjamas and watching Buffy
Exactly.
is actually the healthiest possible thing that you could be doing at that moment.
Exactly. Like I've spoken about it often, that when we lost Alma, I just watched all of Walking Dead back to back, lay in bed and just watch zombies.
Again, you know, that has that same pattern. It has, this is the thing that is bad and this is how we fight it. And there are casualties, but ultimately we keep fighting because otherwise the series doesn't exist. And it's something really comforting to kind of allowing that to like just be percolating in your brain.
I know, because I'd never thought about it in that way at all. I'd always thought about it as that I found some kind of comfort in, well, at least my life isn't that bad. At least I'm not like trying to escape zombies and starving and, you know, but I hadn't thought about how comforting in a way that cycle is, and your brain kind of processing it in that way is actually really useful. And I think that's spot on. Should we walk over there, and then I think there's a corner we could get the flask out and have a brew.
Lovely, let's do that. Just try not to fall on this bit again.
I know. Yeah, it's been really interesting talking to people so far, and like different forms of grief, and I was talking to someone the other day who was talking about the power that she's found in trauma, and about, you know, there's an idea that grief and trauma can debilitate you, and make you weak. And of course there are elements of that. It can break you, and it can, you can feel completely helpless, but there's just so many different things that it brings up. Like it's almost like surges sometimes of power and adrenaline and embracing either feeling fully alive because you've been so close to death and like the world is just so bright or then all the shades between, and then just in darkness. And
that's fascinating.
You talked a bit as well in your piece on Buffy about grieving. I don't know if you want to talk about this, you don't need to, but grieving the woman, the girl that you could have been if things that had happened in your teens hadn't happened.
I've been trying to think about how I can approach talking about this, if I can even approach talking about this.
Don't worry if you don't feel...
No, I'm happy to give it a go. Whether it will be fluent or not is another thing. I had some experiences as a young teenager, which I'm not going to be specific about, but they were traumatic things that happened to me at a point where your brain is really forming. I think that like those particularly early teen years, everything is changing so quickly and you're just kind of putty, and I think often you can be quite vulnerable. I'm also now perhaps beginning to understand that vulnerability a little bit more. I'm going to be assessed in a few weeks for autism, and part of me wonders whether I was perhaps less able to navigate what was true and what wasn't at that time. As a part of that, I think there was a naivety that could be connected to that meant that I was a little more at risk, maybe.
That's interesting.
Of kind of being taken advantage of, and these are things that I've been unpicking this for forever, and I think I will always be unpicking this, and I continue to kind of go back to themes in my writing that are around someone as an adult understanding a trauma that happened to them, I guess at a formative age, and those traumas tend to be connected to the traumas that I experienced, but not necessarily that I'm just kind of no matter what my character is and whether or not I think that's what they're going to be dealing with, they always seem to be. And I think that perhaps that girl that I was writing before I wrote my character in Kingfisher, my confident, privileged character in Kingfisher, was maybe a version of me. Sort of immediately walking into that trope of it all being about you after all, but the fact that she just never quite managed to find agency, and she was still sort of, no matter what, trying to do what was expected of her, or be something that she thought she was supposed to be, and was kind of so damaged by what happened to her. And I do wonder whether, maybe the reason I wanted to stop writing her was because I was sick of feeling like that. It's like, actually, maybe I want to be a privileged gay man with beautiful long hair. I mean, I kind of do.
You kind of are.
I am a bitchy queen, actually. 100%. And I think I do feel a lot of grief for her, and a lot of the kind of work I've done in therapy has been around trying to befriend her, I suppose.
Find a stone. There's one
that looks like quite a good chair, but we're
stretched far enough. You sit there.
Okay, you sure?
Yeah. Sorry, carry on. So what you've been doing in therapy?
Has been around trying to befriend her and forgive her. I had a lot of blame for this young version of me. Which is wild, because, if I met someone like that, I'd be like, they're a child. They need protecting. So I think that there was a kind of knock-on effect of that period of life where I left school, and I, I'm smart, and I could have done all sorts of things from quite a young age that I perhaps didn't do, and I kind of did jobs I didn't really like for a very long time and was very lost, and eventually ended up going back to study in my 20s. So I did my maths GCSE when I was 25, and then I did an access course for a year, and then I went to university, and then I did my masters.
Right.
And I think, there's a version of me who would have realised many years ago that she could walk into rooms and belong there, and would have maybe done that study a long time ago, and therefore be so much further on with her kind of, I guess, creative work. And but then also all of the stories that I have now probably wouldn't exist in the same way. But I think there is a grief there. There's a lot of, I mean, I can't help but feel that we sort of collect grief as we get older, unfortunately. Whether it's the kind of the grief that we understand from losing someone, or whether it's like the grief of a relationship ending, or of just not turning out to be the person that we kind of thought we were going to be, or grief around friendships. But I don't know. If we're assuming that grief is love, which I think is, I think it's a fair statement. I think it's love with nowhere to go, as I think Fleabag has said, amongst many other people. Then, if we're collecting grief as we get older, then that means that we've just got all these sources of love that we've been collecting, and they're quite heavy to carry around a lot of the time, and could be quite difficult. But that's also pretty lovely.
That's beautiful.
Very soppy all of a sudden. What have you done to me?
Just gave you a cup of tea.
Yeah, that's all I needed.
That's such a beautiful way of looking at it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm only capable of looking at it now that way. You know, I think even attempting to look at it like that when you're in the throes of that, you know, the bit where you're like bleeding everywhere and nothing means anything and you can't eat, and but I have reformed myself around my recent griefs, and soon enough something else will happen, I'm sure, and I'll have to do it again. Do you think you ever get better equipped at it? Do you think it's something that you ever kind of learn to, I don't know, navigate in a stronger... I actually hate the word strong. I don't think strong, I think it's such a kind of redundant word in a way. I guess how you approach the process of it, I don't know. Because there's that thing of like, you know, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I just kind of think, well, I don't really know, actually. That's true.
No, I think in some ways it just, you know, you kind of just become softer in some ways. And
but I don't know, because they're all so different, aren't they?
I think that's it, isn't it? They're so different and so individual, and because, you know, there's grief of all sorts of people, but also you're saying, you know, yourself and illness and careers in so many ways. But they're all so different, and also at different times in your life, and you're a different person each time when you're processing that grief. So it's like it's kind of a fresh hell each time.
Oh, what a hopeful thought.
You know, it doesn't remain hell.
No, it doesn't.
Because I think like so many griefs that I've felt, I'll never feel this much pain ever again. But it's not that it's like the quantity of the pain, it's just a different pain. Each one is just a different pain.
Yeah.
And all the complexities of it.
Yeah. I've also done something really stupid and got a dog. And I genuinely think that's going to be the worst.
Oh, love.
I'm sort of joking, but I sort of mean it.
Yeah.
Because it's totally uncomplicated, unconditional love.
Yeah.
Like with my dad, I just thought, oh, he was sort of quite sexist and made really bad jokes and just like genuinely quite a complicated person. But Otter is perfect.
Well, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
I feel like a cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Absolutely. Such a beautiful day as well. I sort of feel like we could have been in sundresses and wellies.
I know.
Like festival gear.
That would have been a picture. You can find Rozie on Instagram at Rozeamee, ROZEAMEE, and her debut novel Kingfisher will be released by Saraband Books in 2025. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of On the Irregular on Creativity and Grief. Please remember to review and subscribe, as it makes all the difference in helping other listeners find us.